A disabled puppy begs a cop for help, and she instantly bursts into tears. But this isn't just about saving a wounded animal. From the moment that Tiny Paw touches her boot, a hidden truth begins to unravel, one darker, more dangerous, and more personal than she ever imagined. What begins as an act of compassion spirals into a fight against power, cruelty, and secrets buried for years. Every step forward brings shocking revelations, and every choice could cost her everything she loves. Why did this broken little puppy appear in her path on that stormy night? What secret is powerful enough to shatter a hardened cop and drag her into a battle she never asked for? And when the truth finally comes out, will it set her free or destroy her for good? This channel isn't just about stories. It's about holding on to what still matters: empathy, truth, love, and the courage to care. The late October rain fell in steady sheets across the empty Kentucky back roads, creating silvery ribbons that snaked through the beam of Officer Lorna Hale's patrol car headlights. Her hands gripped the steering wheel with practiced steadiness as she navigated the slick asphalt, the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers marking time in the darkness. At 35, Lorna wore her auburn hair pulled back severely under her uniform cap, her sharp features set in the mask of professional detachment she had perfected over her years on the force. The night shift was her preference. Fewer people to interact with, fewer chances for anyone to peek behind the walls she had carefully constructed. The clock on her dashboard read 11:45 when she rounded a bend near Miller's Creek. Through the curtain of rain, something small and dark stumbled into her headlights. Lorna's trained reflexes kicked in instantly as she slammed on the brakes, the patrol car sliding slightly before coming to a complete stop. Her heart hammering, she squinted through the rain-streaked windshield. There, illuminated in the harsh glare of her headlights, was a puppy. It couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 months old, its fur matted with mud and what looked disturbingly like blood. The small creature limped forward unsteadily, favoring its right front paw. "Dear Lord," Lorna whispered, reaching for her flashlight. She stepped out into the rain, her boots splashing in growing puddles as she approached the injured animal. The puppy froze, trembling visibly, but didn't retreat. "It's okay, little one," she said softly, crouching down. "I won't hurt you." The puppy took one halting step forward, then another. Lorna remained perfectly still, rain running down her neck and soaking into her uniform. As she watched, the small dog limped closer until it was right in front of her. Then, in a gesture that shattered every defensive wall Lorna had built around her heart, the puppy pressed its uninjured paw against her boot. The simple touch sent a jolt through her entire body. Suddenly she was 16 again, standing in this same rain, watching as police officers combed the roadside with flashlights, searching for any clue about the driver who had struck her 12-year-old brother Tommy and left him to die alone in the darkness. Her throat closed up as memories she thought she had safely locked away came flooding back. Tommy's laugh. The way he would run to meet her after school. The sound of their mother's scream when the police came to the door that night. The puppy whimpered, drawing Lorna back to the present. Her cheeks were wet with more than rain as she gently reached out toward the injured animal. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. "I've got you." With trembling hands, she carefully lifted the puppy. It was so light, so fragile in her arms. The small creature pressed against her chest, seeking warmth, and Lorna felt something crack open inside her. A door she had kept firmly shut for 20 years. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," she said, hurrying back to her patrol car. She grabbed the emergency blanket from her trunk, wrapping it around the shivering puppy before placing it gently on the passenger seat. As she slid behind the wheel, Lorna's hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. The professional distance she had maintained for so long, the careful emotional control that had defined her career in law enforcement. It was crumbling in the face of this unexpected encounter. She glanced at the puppy, now curled up in the blanket beside her. Its eyes, dark and trusting despite its obvious pain, met hers. In that moment, Lorna realized that she had been running from her grief for so long, hiding behind her badge and her duty, that she had almost forgotten how to feel. "Hang on, little one," she said, flipping on her emergency lights and making a careful U-turn. The nearest emergency vet was 30 minutes away, but she would get there as fast as safely possible. As she drove through the rain, Lorna found herself talking softly to the puppy, words she hadn't allowed herself to speak in years. "I know what it's like to be hurt and alone," she murmured, one hand reaching over to gently stroke the blanket-wrapped bundle. "But sometimes help comes when you least expect it. Sometimes you find exactly what you need, even if you didn't know you were looking for it." The puppy's tail thumped weakly against the seat, and Lorna felt tears spill down her cheeks again. For the first time in 20 years, she didn't try to hold them back. Sometimes, she realized, it took a small, wounded creature to help heal the deepest wounds, the ones you thought would never stop bleeding. The fluorescent lights of the veterinary clinic cast harsh shadows as Lorna paced the waiting room, her boots squeaking against the linoleum floor. Her uniform was still damp from the rain, and her heart raced with an anxiety she hadn't felt in years. Through the examination room window, she watched Dr. Elias Rourke work with gentle precision over the trembling puppy. Dr. Rourke's weathered hands moved with practiced care as he examined the small creature. His salt and pepper hair and lined face spoke of years of experience, but it was the gentleness in his blue eyes that caught Lorna's attention. He looked up and motioned for her to enter. "Officer Hale," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to fill the sterile room. "I'm afraid what we're looking at here isn't good." Lorna stepped closer, her throat tightening as she saw the extent of the injuries under the bright medical lights. The puppy's golden fur was matted with mud and blood, but it was what lay beneath that made her stomach turn. "These injuries," Dr. Rourke continued, carefully parting the fur around a particularly nasty wound, "they're systematic, deliberate." His fingers traced along the puppy's side where the fur had been partially shaved. "And look here. There's scarring where a microchip was recently removed. Someone took the time to file it off." The puppy whimpered, pressing closer to Lorna's hand where it rested on the examination table. Those big brown eyes looked up at her with such trust that it made her chest ache. "Filed off?" Lorna's police instincts kicked in. "That's not something an average person would think to do." "No," Dr. Rourke agreed, his expression grim. "This isn't neglect or a one-time incident. These injuries tell a story of someone who knows exactly what they're doing, someone who's likely profiting from this kind of cruelty." Lorna felt her jaw clench. "I need to report this. Open an investigation." The higher-ups might not take kindly to resources being spent on an animal case, Dr. Rourke warned, though his eyes showed approval. "Especially with limited evidence." "I know that look in your eyes, Officer Hale," he added softly. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" The puppy had managed to crawl closer to Lorna despite its injuries, pressing its small body against her uniform. The gesture was so trusting, so desperate for protection, that Lorna felt something crack in her carefully maintained professional facade. "My superiors have already warned me not to overreach," she admitted, gently stroking the puppy's head. "Said I should focus on real crimes, but this is real. This matters." Dr. Rourke nodded, beginning to clean one of the wounds. "Sometimes the cases that matter most are the ones nobody else wants to see." He paused, looking at her directly. "Whatever you decide to do, I'll help however I can. My clinic's resources are at your disposal." The puppy nuzzled against Lorna's hand, letting out a small whine that seemed to say, "Don't leave me." The sound pierced straight through to her heart, reminding her of another plea for help that had gone unanswered years ago. "I can't walk away from this," she said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Someone's out there, hurting animals for profit, thinking nobody cares enough to stop them. They're wrong. Dr. Rourke's face softened with understanding. We'll need to keep him here overnight for observation and start him on antibiotics. He began preparing a bandage. But he's going to need somewhere to go after that. The puppy's paw reached out, pressing against Lorna's arm just as it had done on the road, and she knew she was already lost. I'll take him, she said quietly. At least until we figure this out. I thought you might say that, Dr. Rourke replied with a gentle smile. Sometimes the cases choose us, Officer Hale, not the other way around. As Dr. Rourke continued his treatment, Lorna watched the puppy's eyes growing heavy with the pain medication. Even as it drifted off to sleep, it kept one paw firmly pressed against her arm, as if afraid she might disappear if it let go. The gravel crunched under Lorna's patrol car as she pulled up to Caskell's stables, and sprawling property where perfectly painted white fences stretched as far as the eye could see. The morning sun caught the polished brass nameplate at the entrance, making it gleam like a trophy. Several leads had pointed her here, to Vernon Caskell's domain. She stepped out of her car, taking in the immaculate grounds. Prize-winning horses, grazed in distant paddocks, their coats gleaming. Everything looked picture-perfect. Almost too perfect. Behind the main stables, she spotted the kennel building that had drawn her attention through local rumors. A tall man in an expensive tailored suit emerged from the main office. Vernon Caskell moved with the confidence of someone who owned not just the property, but everything and everyone around it. His smile was practiced, but his eyes remained cold. "Officer Hale," he called out, spreading his arms in welcome. "To what do I owe the pleasure of a visit from our fine police department?" Lorna maintained her professional demeanor. "Mr. Caskell, I'm following up on some concerns about possible animal welfare violations in the area. I understand you run a kennel facility here?" "Indeed I do," Caskell replied smoothly. "Would you like a tour? We maintain the highest standards of care for all our animals." His charm was flawless, but something in his tone made the hair on the back of Lorna's neck stand up. They walked toward the kennel building, Caskell filling the air with casual conversation about his successful horse breeding program. Inside, the kennel was clean and well-organized, with several healthy-looking dogs in spacious runs. "As you can see, officer," Caskell gestured around, "everything here is absolutely by the book. We take pride in our operation." Lorna noted how the dogs seemed to shrink away when Caskell passed their kennels. "Have you had any escapees recently? Perhaps a golden-colored mixed-breed puppy?" Something flickered in Caskell's eyes, just for a moment, before his smile widened. "I'm afraid not. We keep very careful track of our animals." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Though I must say, it seems like an awful lot of police resources being spent on a single stray dog." The threat in his words was subtle but clear. Lorna held his gaze. "Animal cruelty often indicates larger criminal activities, Mr. Caskell. It's our duty to investigate thoroughly." Of course," he chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Though I've always found our local police force serves best when focusing on more pressing matters. I'm sure your captain would agree." The reference to her superior wasn't casual, and they both knew it. Caskell's connections to local officials were well known, though never openly discussed. "I appreciate your time, Mr. Caskell," Lorna said, keeping her voice level despite the anger building inside her. "Any time, Officer Hale," he replied, walking her back to her car. "Do give my regards to Captain Morrison. We play golf together most Sundays. Such a reasonable man." Back at the station, Lorna's meeting with Captain Morrison went exactly as Caskell had implied it would. The captain barely looked up from his paperwork as she presented her suspicions. "Vernon Caskell is one of the largest employers in the county." Morrison cut her off. "He's got a spotless record and friends in every government office. You're talking about risking department resources and relationships over what? A few unproven rumors about dogs? Sir, if you just look at the evidence, that's enough, Hale. Morrison's tone was final. Drop this witch hunt now. That's an order. Lorna left the captain's office, her hands clenched into fists. Through his political connections and careful facade, Caskill had made himself untouchable. But as she thought of the injured puppy recovering at her home, she knew she couldn't let this go, no matter how powerful her opponent might be. The setting. Sun painted the Kentucky sky in deep purples and oranges as Lorna parked her unmarked car a quarter-mile from Caskill's stables. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she crept through the shadows of towering oak trees, staying well hidden from the security cameras she'd spotted during her official visit. The evening air carried the distinct sounds of dogs, not just barking, but painful yelps that made her stomach turn. Drawing closer to the rear buildings, Lorna pressed herself against the weathered wood of an old storage shed. Voices drifted from around the corner, accompanied by the metallic clang of cage doors. "Get that one ready for Saturday night," a gruff voice commanded. "Vernon's got 5,000 riding on him." "This runt? He ain't gonna last 2 minutes in the pit." Lorna's blood ran cold. Dogfighting. Her suspicions had been right all along. She pulled out her phone, careful to keep it silent, and started recording. The voices continued their cruel discussion about upcoming fights and training methods that made her hands shake with rage. Peering around the corner, she caught sight of 2 men dragging a terrified pit bull toward a smaller structure. The dog's scarred face and trembling legs told a story of repeated abuse, just like the puppy she'd rescued. She shifted position to get a better view, but her boot scraped against gravel. The men whirled around. "Who's there?" Lorna held her breath, pressing deeper into the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, their footsteps moved away. She waited another 10 minutes before carefully making her way back to her car, her phone clutched tight with its damning evidence. The drive home started normally enough. The winding country roads were familiar after years of patrol work, but as she approached Miller's Ravine, something felt wrong. The brake pedal went soft under her foot as she started down the steep grade. "No, no, no," she muttered, pumping. The pedal. Nothing. The patrol car picked up speed, careening toward the sharp curve ahead. The guardrail and the 60-foot drop beyond it rushed closer. Training kicked in. Lorna downshifted, fighting to maintain control as the car fishtailed. She yanked the emergency brake and turned into the skid, her arms straining against the wheel. Metal screamed against metal as the car's side scraped the guardrail, sending sparks flying in the darkness. Finally, the vehicle shuddered to a stop, half on the shoulder and half on the road. Lorna sat frozen, knuckles white on the steering. Wheel! Her breath coming in short gasps. This was no accident. Someone had cut her brake lines, and there was only one person who would have reason to do so. The next morning, instead of support from her department, Lorna found herself sitting across from Captain Reynolds in his office. His face was set in stern lines as he held up her incident report. "Brake failure?" he scoffed. "Our mechanics found nothing wrong with the vehicle? No evidence of tampering?" "That's impossible," Lorna protested. "I know what happened. Vernon Caskill—" "Enough!" Reynolds slammed his hand on the desk. "You've been pushing this vendetta against one of our community's most respected citizens with zero evidence, and now you're driving department vehicles recklessly on dark roads? But I have proof." Lorna reached for her phone, only to discover the recording from the previous night had been corrupted. Nothing but static remained. Her heart sank. "Officer Hale, you're suspended pending review. 2 weeks, no pay, turn in your badge and gun." "Captain, please. This isn't a discussion. You're lucky I'm not recommending termination. Whatever personal crusade you're on, it stops now." Lorna walked out of the station in a daze, her service weapon and badge feeling unnaturally heavy in her hands as she surrendered them to the desk. "Sergeant." Other officers avoided her gaze. The isolation felt complete. She was alone in this fight, marked as unstable and reckless by the very department she'd served faithfully for 8 years. In her car, her personal vehicle now, she gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Vernon Caskell's influence ran deeper than she'd imagined, reaching into the police department itself. He'd nearly killed her last night, and now he'd managed to neutralize her officially. But as she thought about the injured puppy, about the scarred fighting dogs she'd seen, about her brother's unsolved death, something hardened inside her. If she couldn't fight this through official channels, she'd find another way. The suspension wasn't going to stop her. It would only free her to investigate without departmental constraints. But first, she needed to be much more careful. Vernon had shown his hand. He was willing to kill to protect his operation. One wrong move, and the ravine would get another chance to claim her. Lorna sat in her dimly lit kitchen, staring at her badge and service weapon laid out on the wooden table. Her hands still trembled slightly from the near-fatal car incident. The suspension notice from her captain felt like a lead weight in her chest. Outside, a gentle rain tapped against the window panes, matching her somber mood. The puppy she'd rescued, whom she'd started calling Hope, hobbled over on 3 legs and pressed against her calf. Even with bandages still wrapped around its healing injuries, the small creature radiated warmth and trust. Lorna reached down to scratch behind Hope's ears, fighting back tears. Tears. "Maybe I should just let this go," she whispered to the puppy. "What good am I doing anyone if I end up dead in a ditch?" The doorbell's chime startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Dr. Elias Rourke standing on her porch, his dark hair damp from the rain. She hesitated before opening the door. "I heard what happened," Elias said softly, concern etched across his features. "May I come in?" Lorna stepped aside, watching as he shook raindrops from his jacket. Hope immediately limped over to greet him, tail wagging. "At least someone's happy to see me," Elias smiled, kneeling to examine the puppy. "The healing's coming along nicely." "I'm thinking of dropping the investigation," Lorna blurted out, surprising herself with her directness. "They've suspended me, Elias. No one at the department believes me about Caskell. I almost died today." Elias straightened up, his expression serious. "And what happens to the next puppy that comes through my clinic? Or the one after that?" He stepped closer, and Lorna caught the faint scent of antiseptic and coffee that seemed to follow him everywhere. "I've been treating abused animals for years," he continued. "But this is different. This is organized, systematic cruelty. Someone needs to stop it." "I'm just one person," Lorna protested, but her voice wavered. "And Caskell has connections everywhere." "You're not alone," Elias said quietly. His hand found hers, warm and steady. "You have allies. You have me." The simple touch sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Their eyes met, and for a moment the air seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Hope nudged between them, breaking the moment with an insistent whine. Lorna couldn't help but laugh as the puppy demanded attention. "Look at her," Elias said, gesturing to Hope. "When you found her, she was broken and terrified. Now she's healing, growing stronger every day. She didn't give up. Neither should you." Lorna sank onto her couch, and Hope immediately climbed into her lap. "But how do I fight this smart? Caskell's already shown he's willing to kill to keep his operation secret." Elias sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "We start by building a real case. Documentation, witnesses, evidence that can't be ignored. No, more lone wolf tactics. We?" Lorna turned to look at him. "Yes, we." His smile was gentle but determined. "I have records of every abused animal I've treated that might be connected to Caskell. Medical evidence, patterns of injury. It's not enough on its own, but it's a start." Hope stretched across both their laps, completely at ease. Lorna found herself studying Elias's profile, the kind eyes, the slight worry line between his brows, the way his mouth curved when he spoke. She realized with sudden clarity that she trusted him, not just as a vet, but as someone who truly understood what drove her. "Okay," she said finally, "but we do this carefully. No more rushing in half-cocked. I need to think like a detective, not an angry sister." Elias's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of her sister, but he didn't press. Instead, he squeezed her hand again. "Together, then. We'll build this case brick by brick until it's solid enough that even Caskill's connections can't tear it. Down!" The rain outside had softened to a gentle patter. Hope had fallen asleep, sprawled trustingly across their laps. Looking down at the healing puppy, Lorna felt her resolve strengthen. This wasn't just about one dog anymore, or even about her brother. It was about standing up to systematic cruelty, about fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me, for not letting me give up." "Always," Elias replied, his voice equally soft. The word held weight, promise, possibility. As they sat there, planning their next moves while Hope slept peacefully between them, Lorna felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope, not just for solving the case, but for something more personal, something growing between her and the compassionate vet beside her, something that felt a lot like the beginning of healing. Lorna pulled her civilian car into the shadowy parking lot behind Murphy's bar, her heart thumping steadily against her ribs. The message had been cryptic, a hastily scrawled note slipped under her doormat requesting this late-night meeting. She recognized the handwriting from the sign-in sheets. At Vernon's kennel, a figure emerged from behind a dumpster, shoulders hunched. Jenny Martinez, one of Vernon's kennel hands, glanced nervously over her shoulder before sliding into the passenger seat. "I can't stay long," Jenny whispered, her hands trembling as she pulled a manila envelope from her jacket. "If Vernon finds out I talked to you, you're safe here," Lorna assured her, though they both knew how hollow those words might prove. "Tell me what you've seen." "It's not just dogfighting," Jenny's voice cracked. "Vernon runs a whole gambling operation. People bet huge money on these fights. Politicians, business owners, even some cops." She swallowed hard. "Anyone who threatens to talk disappears or has accidents. Like what almost happened to you." Lorna's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "How does he maintain control?" "Fear. Blackmail. He's got dirt on everyone who matters." Jenny pushed the envelope into Lorna's hands. "These are betting records. Dates, names. I've been collecting them for months, but I was too scared to come forward." As Lorna leafed through the papers, a familiar date caught her eye. 3 years ago, the night her brother died. She forced her hands to stay steady as she pulled out that particular sheet. "That was a big night," Jenny commented, not noticing Lorna's sudden tension. "Vernon was in a horrible mood when he came back. Said something went wrong with his truck." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Lorna's brother had been killed in a hit-and-run. The police report had mentioned dark, blue paint transfers on his bicycle, the same color as Vernon's truck. "His truck," Lorna's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "What happened to it?" "He had it repaired the next day. Rush job." Jenny frowned. "Why?" Memories flooded back, the police investigation that went nowhere, the witnesses who suddenly couldn't remember what they'd seen, the case file that mysteriously disappeared. All this time, the answer had been right in front of her. "Jenny," Lorna fought to keep her voice steady, "I need you to write down everything you remember about that night. Every detail about Vernon's behavior, the truck, anything unusual. As Jenny scribbled her statement, Lorna's mind raced. Vernon hadn't just been abusing animals. He'd killed her brother and used his connections to cover it up. The realization settled into her bones like ice. "There's more," Jenny added, passing over her statement. "Vernon's planning something big next weekend, a championship fight. All the important people will be there." She opened the car door, pausing briefly. "Be careful, Officer Hale. Vernon's dangerous when he's cornered." After Jenny disappeared into the night, Lorna sat in her car staring at the documents. Her brother's face flashed in her mind. His easy smile, his gentle way with animals, his dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Dreams that ended on a rain-slicked road, just like the night she found Hope. Her hands stopped shaking. The grief that had haunted her for 3 years crystallized into cold determination. This wasn't just about exposing an animal abuse ring anymore. This was about justice. For her brother, for Hope, for every victim of Vernon's cruelty and corruption. She started her car, her mind already formulating a plan. Vernon Caskell had built his empire on fear and silence, but she would tear it down, with truth and evidence, even if it was the last thing she did. Lorna's fingers trembled as she adjusted the tiny camera hidden in her jacket button. Beside her in the darkened car, Elias double-checked the wireless connection on his tablet. "Signal's good," he whispered, his face illuminated by the screen's soft glow. "Just stay within 50 feet of me, and we'll catch everything." The puppy, now named Hope, lay curled in the back seat, watching them with concerned eyes. Lorna reached back to scratch behind her ears. "You sure you want to do this? It could get dangerous." Elias's warm hand covered hers. "You're not doing this alone. Not anymore." They'd spent 2 weeks planning this operation. Through Tommy's intel, they knew tonight's fights would draw Vernon's biggest crowd yet. The location was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes. "Remember," Elias said, "we're just observers. Get the footage and get out." Lorna nodded, though her heart raced. They split up, approaching the warehouse from different directions. The sound of engines and voices grew louder as she neared the building. 2 burly men guarded the entrance, checking names against a list. She held her breath as she showed the invitation Tommy had secured for her. "Sandra Mitchell," she said, using the alias they'd prepared. The guard barely glanced at her before waving her through. Inside, the warehouse had been transformed into a makeshift arena. Wooden bleachers surrounded a central pit, already splattered, with dark stains. The air reeked of sweat, beer, and fear. Well-dressed spectators mingled, placing bets with Vernon's people. Lorna found a spot near the back, positioning herself to capture both the fighting pit and Vernon's private viewing area. Elias settled into position across the room, pretending to study his tablet while actually monitoring the video feed. The first fights were brutal, but quick. Lorna's stomach turned as she watched injured dogs being dragged away, their fates clear. Through it all, Vernon held court in his elevated seat, accepting envelopes of cash and congratulations from his guests. Then came the main event. Vernon himself stood to address the crowd, his voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's championship match features 2 undefeated champions. Place your final bets now." Lorna's camera captured everything, the rigged odds, the exchange of money, the horrific violence. But most damning of all was Vernon's direct involvement, his commands to his handlers, his obvious control of every aspect of the operation. Halfway, through the main fight, Elias caught her eye and tapped his watch. They had enough. It was time to leave before someone got suspicious. Lorna started making her way toward the exit, her heart pounding. She was almost to the door when she heard Vernon's voice behind her. Leaving so soon? Fighting panic, she turned with a practiced smile. "Just stepping out for some air. Intense. Matches tonight?" Vernon's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile never wavered. "Indeed. Hope you placed your bets wisely." He turned away, distracted by another guest, and Lorna slipped outside. She practically ran to her car, where Hope greeted her with worried whimpers. Minutes later, Elias joined her, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "We got it," he said, showing her the footage. "Everything, the fights, the betting, Vernon running the whole show. This is what the feds need." Lorna stared at the screen, hardly daring to believe they'd succeeded. "First thing tomorrow, we send this to the FBI field office in Louisville. They're outside Vernon's sphere of influence." For the first time in weeks, hope bloomed in her chest. She looked at Elias, at his kind eyes and encouraging smile, then at Hope curled trustingly in the back seat. Something shifted inside her. A letting go, a possibility of life beyond the weight of grief and anger she'd carried for so long. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching for Elias's hand. "For believing in me. For helping me fight this." His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and steady. "We're not done fighting yet, but we will win this, Lorna. Together." The night air carried an unsettling stillness as Lorna pulled into the clinic's parking lot. It was well past midnight, but she had promised to help Elias with Hope's physical therapy exercises. The puppy's leg was healing well, though she still needed regular attention to build strength. Something felt wrong the moment she stepped out of her car. The parking lot was darker than usual. The security light that normally illuminated the entrance was out. As she approached the clinic's door, a faint smell of gasoline made her pause. "Elias?" she called out, pushing the door open. The interior was dim, lit only by the soft glow of emergency exit signs. A crash from the back room made her jump. Hope's frightened yelp followed, and then Elias's voice. "Lorna, run! There—" The explosion cut him off. Fire erupted from multiple points, spreading across the floors and walls with unnatural speed. The gasoline trails ignited, creating a maze of flames that blocked the main entrance. Smoke immediately began filling the space, thick and black. "Elias!" Lorna shouted, dropping to her hands and knees. The heat was intense, making it hard to breathe. She crawled toward the back room, hearing Hope's terrified barking and Elias's coughing. Through the smoke, she made out two figures fleeing through the back door. Vernon's men. They'd planned this, waited for them to be inside, trapped them like animals. The fire spread rapidly, consuming the wooden cabinets and medical supplies. Toxic fumes from burning plastics and chemicals made her eyes water. She found Elias in the treatment room, struggling to stand. A blow to his head had left him dazed, blood trickling down his temple. "Hope's in the kennel area," he managed, leaning heavily against her. They locked her in. The smoke was getting thicker. Lorna could hear the building's structure groaning as the fire ate away at its supports. They had minutes, maybe less. "Come on," she said, pulling Elias's arm over her shoulder. "We have to move." They stumbled toward the kennel area, the heat becoming unbearable. The metal door handle burned Lorna's palm when she grabbed it, but she barely registered the pain. Hope was inside, pressed against the back of her cage, trembling. Lorna fumbled. With the latch, her fingers clumsy from the burn. The puppy's eyes reflected the orange glow of the flames, full of terror. Finally, the cage door swung open, and Hope leaped into her arms. "The back exit," Elias coughed. "It's our only chance." But as they turned, a section of the ceiling collapsed, bringing down a shower of burning debris. Flames blocked their path to the rear door. The main entrance was completely engulfed. They were trapped. Lorna's mind raced. Hope whimpered against her chest, and Elias's breathing grew more labored. The smoke was overwhelming, making it impossible to think clearly. Then she remembered the small window in the storage room. This way. She guided them through the inferno, using her jacket to shield Hope from the worst of the heat. The storage room was filling with smoke, but the window was their last hope. Elias helped her clear the shelving unit beneath the window, though every movement seemed to drain his remaining strength. The window was small, barely big enough for them to squeeze through. "Take Hope," Lorna said, pushing the puppy into Elias's arms. "Get out first." He tried to protest, but another explosion rocked the building. Parts of the ceiling were beginning to cave in around them. There was no time to argue. Elias managed to get through the window, taking Hope with him. Lorna started to follow, but a final collapse sent burning debris crashing down. Pain shot through her leg as something heavy pinned her. "Lorna!" Elias's voice seemed far away. The smoke was so thick she could barely see. Her lungs burned with every breath. With the last of her strength, she pushed against the burning beam that trapped her. The pain was excruciating, but the alternative was death. She thought of her brother, of justice still unpursued, of Elias and hope waiting outside. She couldn't die here, not like this. Finally, the beam shifted just enough. She pulled herself through the window, falling onto the grass outside. Elias was there immediately, dragging her further from the building as more explosions rocked the structure. They watched helplessly as the clinic burned. Everything Elias had built, his life's work, reduced to ash and smoking rubble. Fire trucks wailed in the distance, but they were too late to save anything. Hope pressed against Lorna's side, shaking but alive. Elias sat beside them, his face streaked with soot and blood, staring at the destruction of his dreams. "I'm so sorry," Lorna whispered, her voice raw from smoke. "This is my fault. Vernon did this because of me, because I wouldn't let it go." Elias didn't respond immediately. The flames reflected in his eyes as he watched his clinic burn. Years of helping animals, of building a reputation and a community, gone in minutes. "Everything I've worked for," he finally said, his voice hollow. "All of it just gone." Lorna felt the weight of guilt crushing her chest more painfully than the smoke had. She had dragged Elias into this fight, and now he was paying the price. Vernon was still out there, still powerful, still untouchable, and now he had shown just how far he would go to maintain that power. Emergency vehicles began arriving, their lights painting the scene in harsh reds and blues. Paramedics rushed to check them for injuries, but Lorna barely noticed. All she could see was the devastation she had brought to someone who had only tried to help her. In the distance, through the smoke and chaos, she thought she saw a familiar car driving slowly past. Vernon coming to witness his handiwork. The message was clear. This was what happened to people who challenged him. This was the cost of seeking justice in a world he controlled. Hope huddled closer, her small body still trembling. Lorna held her tight, watching as firefighters fought, a losing battle against the flames. This was her darkest hour, a moment when all her efforts seemed to have led only to destruction and pain. Vernon had won this round, and the cost had been devastating. In the days following the fire, Lorna sat at her kitchen table surrounded by scattered papers and photographs, her laptop glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. The puppy, who she'd finally named Phoenix, dozed in a cushioned bed nearby, his bandaged leg tucked underneath him. His steady breathing reminded her of why she couldn't give up, even after Vernon's devastating attack. She picked up her coffee mug, grimacing at the cold. Liquid. How many hours had she been at this? The wall clock read 4:30 in the morning. Her suspension from the force had given her one advantage: unlimited time to build her case. Every scrap of evidence, every whispered testimony, every financial record she'd managed to obtain. She was weaving it all together into an undeniable pattern of corruption and cruelty. A gentle knock at her back door made her jump. But it was only Elias, carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled of warm pastries. Despite losing his clinic, he'd thrown himself into helping her, working part-time at another vet's office while dedicating his free hours to their cause. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, setting a coffee beside her. "Neither have you," she replied, noting the shadows under his eyes. The fire had left its marks on both of them, not just the lingering cough from smoke inhalation, but deeper scars of trauma and determination. "Any progress?" Elias pulled up a chair, careful not to disturb the organized chaos of her investigation. Lorna nodded, pushing a folder toward him. "I've been cross-referencing Vernon's fight night schedules with local missing pet reports. The pattern is clear. Every time he hosts a major event, pets go missing in a 50-mile radius. He's not just breeding fighting dogs, he's stealing them, using them as practice targets. Phoenix whimpered in his sleep, and both Lorna and Elias looked over at him. The puppy's rescue had been just the tip of a massive iceberg of cruelty. But the real breakthrough came yesterday, Lorna continued, pulling up an email on her laptop. Remember that federal agent I contacted? Agent Sarah Martinez? She's been building a case against underground dogfighting rings across 3 states. Vernon's operation isn't just local, it's part of a larger network. And Martinez needs someone on the inside to help take it all down. Elias leaned forward, his expression intense. What are you planning? Vernon's hosting his biggest event of the year next weekend. High-stakes fights, wealthy spectators, major gambling action. Martinez and her team will be ready, but they need eyes inside. Someone to signal when all the players are in position. That's incredibly dangerous, Lorna. After the fire... I know, she cut him off, her voice soft but firm. But this is our chance. Vernon thinks he's broken us. He won't expect me to come back now, especially not with federal backing. Phoenix had woken up and hobbled over to them, pressing against Lorna's leg. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, drawing strength from his presence. The puppy, who had once been so broken, was growing stronger every day, just like her resolve. Over the next few days, Lorna worked closely with Agent Martinez, planning every detail. They met in secret locations, using burner phones and encrypted messages. The federal task force had been tracking Vernon's network for months, but they needed someone who knew the local terrain, the players, the escape routes. These are your comms, Martinez explained during one meeting, handing Lorna a seemingly ordinary earpiece. Completely undetectable. You'll be able to hear us and we'll hear everything around you. The moment we confirm illegal gambling and fighting, we move in. Lorna studied the building plans of Vernon's compound, memorizing every entrance and exit. His security will be tight, she warned. He pays off-duty cops to work his events. If they spot federal agents too soon, that's why timing is crucial. Martinez agreed. We'll have teams stationed here, here, and here. She pointed to locations on the map. But you're our eyes inside. When you give the signal, we need to move fast enough to prevent evidence from being destroyed. Throughout the May preparations, Elias remained her steadfast support, even though she could see the fear in his eyes. He helped her map out the compound's veterinary setup, identifying where injured dogs might be kept and what evidence to look for. His clinical knowledge would be, I found some of Dad's old photos today, she said, nodding toward the album resting on the small table beside them. There's one of him training Ranger as a pup. He knew exactly what he was doing, preparing him to protect us. Her voice softened. I just never imagined how much we'd need that protection. Elijah reached for the album, careful not to disturb Daniel. Your father was always thinking ahead, he said, flipping through the pages. He saw things others missed, in people, in situations, like father, like daughter. The compliment brought a flush to Caroline's cheeks, but she didn't deflect it as she once might have. She had earned the right to stand tall, to acknowledge her own strength. She had faced down corruption, protected her child, and helped bring justice to light. The ledger might have been her father's legacy, but what she'd done with it, that was entirely her own achievement. Daniel stirred in her arms, blinking sleepily up at her. His innocent smile, untouched by the darkness they'd faced, reminded her of everything she'd fought for. Every struggle, every moment of fear had been worth it to ensure his safety and future. I think, she said slowly, this is what peace feels like. Real peace, not just the absence of trouble. She looked at Elijah, finding warmth in his steady gaze. For the first time since Dad died, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do. The evening air carried the scent of approaching autumn, crisp and clean, Ranger's alert posture relaxed as a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. Here, in this moment, Caroline felt the full weight of her transformation. She was no longer the overwhelmed young mother desperate to prove herself. She had become something more. A protector, a truth seeker, a woman who had faced corruption and emerged victorious. As the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Caroline held her son close, grateful for the loyal dog at her feet and the steadfast friend beside her. She had built something precious here. Not just safety, but a foundation of trust, strength, and possibility. Whatever the future held, she would face it with confidence, knowing she had everything she needed, right here. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you. Crucial for documenting the abuse. The night before the operation, Lorna sat on her back porch with Phoenix in. Her lap, Elias beside her on the wooden swing. The spring air was cool and clear, carrying the scent of blooming dogwoods. In the distance, she could hear crickets chirping, such a peaceful sound in contrast to what lay ahead. "I know I can't talk you out of this," Elias said quietly, "but I want you to know, whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won something important. You showed that standing up to evil matters even when it seems impossible." Lorna turned to look at him, seeing in his face everything she'd come to depend on. His strength, his compassion, his unwavering support. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she admitted. "After my brother died, I thought closing myself off was the only way to survive. But Phoenix showed me there's always hope for healing, and you." She paused, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "You showed me I didn't have to fight alone." Phoenix shifted in her lap, pressing his head against her hand as if in agreement. The puppy had become more than just a rescue. He was a symbol of everything she was fighting for: justice, healing, the chance to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As darkness settled around them, Lorna focused on steadying her nerves. Tomorrow would bring either triumph or disaster. But she was ready. The evidence was prepared, the teams were in position, and her determination was unshakable. Vernon had tried to silence her through intimidation, violence, and nearly murder. But he had underestimated the power of compassion, the strength that comes from fighting for something larger than oneself. She looked down at Phoenix, then over at Elias, drawing courage from their presence. Tomorrow would decide everything, but tonight, she allowed herself to feel the quiet strength of knowing she was doing what was right, no matter the cost. The path ahead was dangerous, but she was no longer the broken officer who had found a wounded puppy on a rainy night. She was stronger now, scarred but unbroken, ready to face whatever came next. In the pale glow of dusk, Lorna crouched behind a weathered pickup truck, her heart pounding against her ribs. The abandoned warehouse at the edge of Vernon Caskell's property loomed ahead, its corrugated metal walls vibrating with the distant sounds of barking dogs and shouting men. She touched the wire concealed beneath her jacket, double-checking that. The recording device was secure. "All units in position," crackled a voice in her earpiece. Federal Agent Martinez's calm tone steadied her nerves. "Remember, Officer Hale, we move on your signal." Through gaps in the building's rusty siding, floodlights blazed. Shadows of Vernon's guests, wealthy men in expensive suits, danced across the walls as they gathered for his exclusive fight night. Lorna's hand instinctively went to her pocket, where she kept a photo of her brother and a small tag from Phoenix's collar. "In position at the rear entrance," Elias whispered through the radio. Despite her protests, he had insisted on being part of the operation. His clinic might be gone, but his determination to see Vernon brought down burned as fiercely as hers. Lorna took a deep breath and moved forward. The main entrance was guarded by 2 of Vernon's men, but they recognized her from her previous visits. Before they could react, she flashed her badge. "Police! Step aside!" The guards hesitated, caught off guard by her boldness. That split second was all the federal agents needed to emerge from their hiding spots, weapons drawn. "Nobody move!" Agent Martinez's voice boomed across the parking lot. Inside, the warehouse erupted into chaos. Lorna pushed through the crowd of panicking spectators, her eyes locked on Vernon. He stood in his usual place beside the fighting pit, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the blood-stained concrete. "Floor! Vernon Caskell!" Lorna's voice carried over the commotion. "You're under arrest for organized crime, animal cruelty, attempted murder, and the hit-and-run death of James Hale." Vernon's face twisted from shock to rage. "You have nothing on me, Officer Hale. Nothing but the ravings of a suspended cop with a vendetta." "That's where you're wrong." Lorna nodded to Agent Martinez, who projected video footage onto the warehouse wall. Images of Vernon's illegal fights, money-changing hands, and documented abuse filled the space. "Your kennel hand didn't just give us evidence of your dogfighting ring. He gave us proof that you were driving the car that killed my brother." The color drained from Vernon's face as his associates began backing away, distancing themselves from his crumbling empire. One by one, his most loyal supporters melted into the crowd, leaving him isolated. "These people protected you because they feared you," Lorna continued, her voice steady. "But fear only works until something stronger comes along, like justice." Vernon lunged for a side door, but Elias stepped out of the shadows, blocking his path. Federal agents converged from all directions, their laser sights creating a web of red dots across Vernon's chest. "It's over," Lorna said, producing her handcuffs. "All those animals you hurt, all the lives you destroyed, including my brother's. It ends tonight." As she secured the cuffs around Vernon's wrists, his arrogance finally shattered. "You don't understand," he sputtered. "I own this town. I own you." "Not anymore," Agent Martinez declared, reading Vernon his rights as other agents began rounding up his associates. Hours later, as dawn painted the Kentucky sky in soft pinks and golds, Lorna stood in the parking lot of the federal building. Vernon and his key accomplices were being processed inside. Years of corruption and cruelty were being dismantled, document by document, confession by confession. Elias approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "How are you holding up?" Lorna accepted, the cup letting its warmth seep into her tired hands. "It doesn't bring James back," she said softly. "But for the first time since he died, I feel like I can breathe." "You did it," Elias said, his eyes full of pride and something deeper. "You brought down Vernon, saved countless animals, and found justice for your brother." "We did it," Lorna corrected him, reaching for his hand. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." The moment was interrupted by a familiar bark. Agent Martinez was walking toward them, leading a limping but tail-wagging phoenix on a leash. "Someone's been asking for you," Martinez smiled. "The adoption papers are ready whenever you are, Officer Hale." Lorna knelt down as Phoenix, soon to be officially named Chance, pressed his head against her knee. "Hey there, brave boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Ready to come home for good?" Elias knelt beside them, and Chance immediately tried to lick both their faces at once. "I think that's a yes," Elias laughed. Standing in the morning, light, with Chance leaning against her legs and Elias's hand warm in hers, Lorna felt the weight of grief finally begin to lift. Justice had been served. But more than that, she had found something she thought she'd lost forever: hope. In Chance's resilient spirit, in Elias's unwavering support, and in her own renewed strength, she discovered that healing wasn't just possible. It was already happening. "Come on," she said, leading them toward her car. "Let's go home." The sun climbed higher in the sky as they drove away from the federal building, leaving behind the darkness of Vernon's crimes and the shadow of her brother's death. In her rearview mirror, Lorna caught glimpses of Chance, curled up contentedly in the back seat, and Elias, whose gentle smile held promises of a future she was finally ready to embrace. If today's story echoed in your heart, I hope you'll stay, subscribe, and I'll be here again tomorrow with another quiet story full of the kind of love that lasts.